Thank you, Chairperson. Since time is at paucity and not much disposal, I would not take much longer to deliberate the issues. But I'll identify the sum and discuss. As a lighter, when I said you cannot make a point without a PowerPoint. And I really tried to make a PowerPoint, then I found that my PowerPoint didn't work. And then I realized the famous saying which said power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. So I thought I would not use PowerPoint and deal with this. The simple thing that I was trying to tell us about tribal identity, because I was supposed to say in education, so I would link that tribal identity with education together. And I say today, as I look at this conglomerate of people, forget about tribal life. In fact, I think my own identity transition, because I am a purely sociologist and coming to anthropologist, it actually reminds Bernard Cohen's famous lines which said, an anthropology among historians and other essays. And I think as a studying sociology, and particularly something as sociology of law, I think it provides a very interesting vantage point to look into the questions of tribal identity, because identities are, as you said, are creation, a social construction. So long ago, it was a social construction of life. There is writing a book, Berger and Lockman says, the social construction of reality. And I consider this notion of identity as a social construction of reality. And day in and day out, these identities are not only given. Sometimes we find there are fragmented identities, sometimes unevenly constructed. But the deep construction of identities in today, as you look at in tribal areas, they think, how do we look at ourselves? And as Professor Roth was telling earlier, the tribals are no different from other people. And therefore, as Hindu ideology in a different context says, that I write this sloka which said, Janmanayang Jayate Sudra Sanskara Didauchyate Veda Vyas Viprah Brahmajanati Brahmanam. It talks about different context, that your identity is what is born and what you are made. And the only thing that actually transforms this identity is today's context is education. That when you born as what I am and what I today, because your multi-layer levels, this what changes your identity is your consciousness. Now that is why as long as you continue to change your consciousness, look at it and then examine continuously, and you will find that how we are transforming itself. If a ugly caterpillar can transform the butterfly, that is also an identity transformation. And so when I look at these notions of identities today in a larger context as the tribal societies, they think why education is important to them. Now what we consider that anthropologists tell about the ethic and emic division, what people perceive them to be and what they themselves perceive to be. And I think today's world, if you think any development can be done, and that is why the logic and language of development need to be translated to the people for whom it is intended. As I said, Levi-Straussian model, we often look at what he was trying to say. Either you look tribal society as completely idyllic, what is called Russian sense, a romanticization, or you can look at, they are like tribals are as very uncultured, barbarian, savage people, what is called demonization. And this Levi-Straussian binary opposition, though provided a very interesting anecdote to understanding the dynamics, but it has completely failed to show. Because the world, as I say, it's 50 shades of gray. It is not either black and white. So we need to take into consideration of that. And that sense, I think, if today's developmental analogy, if you look at, the only concern I can think from a perspective of law. Because law is required in the sense, both for the ruler and for the ruled. And when you say the state, somebody says, no, state is really demonizing state. State is oppressive, state is ruthless. And it also comes from a sociologist called Max Weber, who said that state has absolute monopoly over legitimate violence. Now therefore we look at state, and therefore sometimes we follow law because we fear punishment. But generally if you look at that, a law itself has a very strong transformative potential. And that is why the law is required for the ruler and the ruled. For the ruled require, because it provides the protection. Law is the weapon of the what is called weak against the mighty, and therefore the rule. And that is why today, if you look at the constitutional protection, which is called all tribal constitution, come to that, because this constitutional protection either from the fundamental rights or from elsewhere, from the 34, 33, 32, 346, we look at that. That is provides because that law protects the people. And secondly, when you look, the ruler also require law because law legitimizes their rule. And therefore, when I think law is, and interestingly, sociologists, anthropologists, and other scholars tend not to look at law as an phenomena in the sense that it could have a tremendous liberating potential. But we don't look at law as an emancipatory project primarily because we look from our own prisms. And firstly, we are afraid of law, saying that it's difficult to understand and so. And lawyers actually made it difficult. Because if you study law, you will look at English. And if you understand English, lawyers will start speaking in Latin. And therefore, you don't understand that. For example, we often see as the idea that actus non facitrium nisi mens citeria, which say that law is that crime is not crime because it has just simply behavior. It must be a mental construct to kill. There must be intention to kill. And that intention must be guilty. And that you understand Latin. And therefore, we tend to avoid law. But I think in today's context, if we tend to look down at law, not take into consideration, then I think we have a largest missing link. And that is why today I also thank Professor Gregory who was talking about tribal Panchashil, but I would change that because I think the tribal Panchashil has to be a new tribal Panchashil. And this Panchashil comes from the 5 important laws. And these 5 important laws have a very tremendous liberating potential. The first law, as I said, you can actually change the hierarchy or order of that. But I think the first law, which is very significant from tribal perspective, is Forest Rights Act, which is called the rights of tribals to forest land. Talk about then. The second law, which is equally important for that, is the Human Rights Act 1993, because we consider tribal rights within the boundary of human rights. So human rights law again. Third, which is equally important, is the Panchayat extension to the Scheduled Areas Act, because that provides again tribal autonomy. Not forget about tribal sub-plan, but autonomy within the context of law. And then we look at fourth right, which is equal again, which has become necessary tool for social transformation, is Right to Information Act. Now, if you don't take Right to Information Act, you actually understand that what is happening in around, and you take into account that I can actually make my subject, my state, which is dichotomy between sovereign and the subject. Now, the sovereign-subject dichotomy must be crystallized in the form of the ability of a subject to question the sovereign, what is called the interrogating the sovereign. And therefore, the Right to Information Act becomes significant to us. And the last but not least, that is the constitutional amendment, we talk about insertion of Article 21A as the fundamental right and come through the law, which is called Right to Education Act or Free and Compulsory Education Act. Now, if you take this Free and Compulsory Education Act, again, education as a developmental tool, which was again, interestingly, it was the Brazilian writers, the Paulo Freire, who said that pedagogy of oppressed. Now you are given a different type of education. Today your personality changes because you think, and most of us think, as you call, we are different to others. And because you have got a differential education. And today if you look at our education system, and if there was primary education, everybody wanted to have a uniform. Now we find every nook and corner of a remote society area, you will find there is a Little Angel private school. Seven Sins God School. You will find all the schools you will find. And Fortune Institute of Management, Misfortune Institute of Management, everywhere you find. Because we think we need to distinguish ourselves from the rest. And this differential perspective of education need to challenge. I think Right to Education Act is a fundamentally guaranteeing is good. But we must ensure that there must be a unitary system of education prevalent. Because as I continue to say, our tribal schools, Assam schools are failed to a large extent. Only thing can successful Navodaya Vidyalaya because Navodayas are to an extent make a very categorical statement and then try to intervene small as they are, and to some extent the students are competitive. But that is a good that is evaluation that happens. But we must look into together that if we have a law, we must continue to negotiate with the state, not ordinarily. Because law has also its potential. The highest form of law that we call in India is the Constitution. And interestingly, Article 364 of the Constitution guarantees that we can make amendment to the Constitution. Forget about what Supreme Court says much later, that basic structure cannot be amended, but nonetheless, if you look within that basic structure, look at the constitutional values and see that education is there, then we must amend it to the extent that we must create what I call in law, or we call it law in fact generally, to create a free, fair and prejudice-free society. Free and fair society. And if you look at the free, fair and reasonable society, then I think the role that plays significant in education. And as you see, because I don't want to discuss, I don't take much of your time, because not because I can't speak, but because you would not listen too much. And therefore, what you find, the essential idea is that you can look at my paper, that we must not stop at primary education. Because by giving primary education, we will create a third world colony, and a fourth world colony in a third world country. We must provide higher education among tribals. And I must think, as a first step, we must establish institutions of higher repute in tribal areas, and providing, if required, 20%, 30% reservation to tribal areas, so that they can do actually. And if 5 of them, 10% of them can really come to Main Street through higher education, and I think the society would certainly change. And I would stop at the one example which I said. And for that, we need to be very sensitive one. And I finished it up with a small anecdote. I said that once 2 of 5 friends, because most universities are situated like this, bigger areas, large campuses, most of them are unbelated and undeveloped. So there's the anthropologist and a man from commerce, both are walking down the corridors, evening. And then the commerce man stopped and asked the anthropologist that, listen, the anthropologist asked, what happened? Why did you stop? He said, I stopped because I heard a sound. Oh, what sound? I didn't listen. No, it was a sound of a metal beating the stone. And therefore I want to look. So the anthropologist said, no, we are going somewhere, let's continue, I don't want to go there. But the commerceman didn't listen. He said, no, I want to go and inquire. Lo and behold, he goes and in there and found there is a gold bracelet lying there, which is making a sound. He picked it up and said, look, I have got this. Normally commercemen are not very, in that sense, very economics. So, but then he was a nice commerceman. He said, since both of us together, should we share the boutique? And the anthropologist, for a change, said, no, thank you very much. You have got it, so you take it yourself. Though anthropologists normally don't say that, but he said, I don't want to share because you got it, so you take it. And after a few lines, after a few steps, again, the anthropologist stopped. He said, no, listen, I have heard a sound. This commerceman, no, I didn't have the sound. No, I have heard a sound. I want to inquire. He goes and he inquires. Don't worry, he didn't find the diamond. But yes, what he found? He said that instead there is a mountain, there is 2 stones crossed like there, and when the stone, there is a small plant goes through, and in the plant, there was a spider web. And in the spider web, there is a small fly flapping his wings. He said, I have listened to this flapping of the wings because I want to get it free. And the anthropologist go for a change, get set, go and set the fly free, giving him the freedom. And this commerceman asked, how did you know? You didn't listen to the sound of a metal crushing metal, but you heard a sound of a butterfly, that's a fly flying somewhere down inside there. Anthropologist smiled and says, I can sound that because I had a sensitive heart. And I think we must have a sensitive heart to look at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mohanty, for being brief and be pointed.